Thank you all for coming today. We appreciate it. Our third panelist, Mary Kissel, is going to join in a minute. I'm here with Dan Harris, co-hosting the webinar, Strategy Risks, and Harris Sliwoski. Thank you all for coming, navigating geopolitical risk in the age of AI innovation. So Dan's going to kick us off, but I'll encourage folks to be thinking through questions, ways that we can be helpful as your particular businesses navigate the insanity that is passing for geopolitics in the world today. Dan and I were chatting beforehand, and Dan has some thoughts on AI risk and how to navigate it. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Isaac. And I'm going to reiterate what Isaac said, which is we encourage questions. I think Isaac has overestimated what I'm going to be doing here. It's more like just spewing forth ideas regarding the interaction between AI and geopolitics and AI and business, the interaction and the influences. And it's sort of a collection of ideas, some of which I have come to me in my dealings as a lawyer working with companies. So, and of course, a lot of these you're going to be familiar with. So what is AI doing to the world today, and what kind of impact is that going to have on geopolitics? And first thing that's pretty obvious is warfare. Look at what Israel has been doing. Look at what Israel has done with lasers. Israel's a country of 10 million people, and it's doing, and I say this totally apolitically and without any judgment one way or the other, but the precision of its bombing is off the charts. And that is largely due to AI. So AI is obviously influencing warfare. We see it in Russia and Ukraine. Before coming here today, I watched President Trump speak at the UN, and he talked about how Ukraine has surprised the world by doing so well in the war, and that's due to drones, which is largely due to AI. So that's obviously a big issue. Something else that I am seeing is solo businesses that are run by AI. You can have a business with essentially, hi Mary, essentially 40 employees that are all bots and run a business. And they talk about how someday there'll be, and maybe there already is, a solo business that's worth $1 billion. Well, think how that's going to influence the world. Where is the person running that business going to be located? What taxes are they going to be using? What currency are they going to be using? What governments are going to control that person? That's going to have an influence. Something that I know Isaac and Mary often talk about is how the world is dividing up by chips and AI, which kind of go together. I was telling Isaac, I have a friend who's literally getting a PhD in AI and geopolitics. He's a retired lawyer, and he always uses Columbia as an example. And he'll say, you know, which AI camp is Columbia going to fall under? And how is that going to influence Columbia? And speaking of Columbia, I've dealt with lawyers in Spain and Colombia whose English is incredible. And eventually I have to ask them if they're using AI, and they are. And so I have no idea how good their English really is, but think about how that's influencing business. I mean, you could be in Kenya, or that Kenya is a bad example. You could be in Albania and not speak a word of English, and do business internationally as though you do. That's going to influence things. Then there's a company out there called Sinosure. Sinosure is China's export insurance company. They basically insure every export. They monitor every transaction. They have access to pretty much every company in China that exports. So they know if you're buying 100 widgets this week or 1,000. Think of what power that gives to Sinosure. And it's essentially a government entity. And I deal with Sinosure all the time. And I have become convinced that one of its goals is to weaken the American economy. And why not? That's one of the goals of the Chinese government. And yet here's Sinosure. And who are they going to weaken? They're going to weaken the companies that they want to weaken, the companies that compete with their companies. And every American company that buys a widget from China is exposed to Sinosure in terms of both information and possible retaliation. And speaking of retaliation, infrastructure. Look what's happening in Europe right now with airports. I was actually in Spain when they lost power in the entire country for about, where I was, it was only about 6 hours, but it was about 24 hours in much of the country. And everybody there was convinced that it was Russia who did it. Everybody's convinced it's Russia who's causing these airport problems. Is it? We don't know. But the point is, they can do that. And they can do it through AI. And to end on a good note, there are people who believe, in fact, just this morning I read that the S&P 500 is just going to keep rising. I don't know whether I believe it. I'm not telling people to believe it, but the thesis behind that statement is that it's going to keep rising because the AI boom is going to lead to efficiencies. Maybe the Donald Fagen song will be eternally rich and eternally young thanks to AI. I don't know, but that's a good way to kick it off.
Thank you, Dan. Mary, we'll go to you for an introduction and also some broad thoughts on how companies can or should be navigating these risks.
Thank you, Isaac. It's a pleasure to be back with you and Dan. And my apologies for joining the feed late. Brief introduction of me. I'm Executive Vice President at Stephens. We're a large family-owned, privately run, privately operated financial services firm. So we do everything that Wall Street does, plus an insurance arm, plus family office. So we're headquartered in Arkansas, but we have branches across the country, also in London, Frankfurt. So we see a different swath of the economy than the bulge bracket investment banks do. I'm also vice chair of RXO. It's the third largest truck brokerage in America. And I'm on the board of QXO, which is a Fortune 500 company. We do building materials distribution. And this topic is just absolutely perfect because AI, big data collection and analysis and machine learning, it's just absolutely core to all of the XO businesses and has been from their beginning. How will AI transform our economy? I mean, Dan is giving you a wonderful set of examples. We're the last people that are going to be working in human-only businesses. We're going to have agents next to us, or as Dan said, it might just be one person with, AI agents, and who knows, maybe robots running around behind us. That future is now. That is, if it isn't already happening in your business, then you're already behind. And Isaac, you and I have talked a lot about the productivity competition and the data collection competition between U.S. Corporates and, of course, what's going on in communist China. For those of you who don't know, the three of us know each other from Asia days. I used to run the editorial board for the Wall Street Journal in Hong Kong, and I later served for Secretary Mike Pompeo. I was his right hand. So we did a lot of policy work, and we became very, very obvious to us that, really, the goal is for the United States to keep up with what's going on in Chinese AI. I don't think anyone on this call, if you haven't been to China, or I can't go. I'm not sure you can go either. But most of the people I think you see commentating on TV don't have any idea of what's actually going on in China and just how advanced they are. And that's very bracing. I think the closest we've gotten is the ASPI report. That's a think tank in Canberra, Australia. it essentially concluded that the Chinese are ahead of us in pretty much everything when it comes to AI. And that's not an exaggeration. So if you take that as correct, that makes it even more important, not just to adopt as quickly and as prudently as you can, but it makes the government side of what's going on here in the United States deeply important. We do have a very pro-business administration. They've taken a very, I think, forward-leaning approach to AI. David Sachs, of course, is the AI czar. It's that important to the future of the American economy that the administration focused to that degree to have somebody in the White House just on this issue. But you really can't overstate what the implications are going to be. I mean, this could increase productivity more than the advent of the internet, and I'm not exaggerating there. I'll just give you one more example, maybe from our businesses, or actually, Walmart came out with a great post recently about how AI was transforming their supply chain. It was helping. Let's just take supply chains, right? Allowing businesses to rationalize their locations, to route trucks to the fastest routes that they can, seeking out the cheapest gas, finding the quickest suppliers, instructing companies on how to properly load and store for the most efficient way possible. The HR functions are incredible. The pricing functions are incredible. Of course, the airlines are the greatest example there. But everything's going to get priced like an airline, minute to minute, because AI will allow for us to do that. I was with a CEO of a company recently who said, we're not going to have any more entry-level tech people. So how are we going to groom mid and senior level tech expertise? Because they're not hiring entry-level tech workers. Again, this is happening right now. So timely topic. I've talked way too long, but it is just a delight to be back with you two. And I appreciate the invitation. And again, I'm very sorry that I had to join a bit late.
Thank you, Mary. So I'll introduce myself, share some thoughts. Please do put questions in the chat as we go through this conversation. I'm Isaac Stonefish, CEO and founder of Strategy Risks. We're a China-focused business intelligence firm. Do a lot of sensitive due diligence and data analysis on links between global entities and the party and other Chinese entities, and a lot of other sensitive global due diligence. I want to share some thoughts concretely on the risk aspect of this as it comes to US, China especially, but other countries. First off, as NVIDIA is finding out now, every company is a pawn between the United States and China, and working closely with one side breeds distrust on the other side. And so what seems to be happening with Beijing restricting NVIDIA chips is it seems like something is too good to be true in Beijing's mind. And the way the Communist Party works, the Politburo Standing Committee doesn't share its inner thoughts on this. So we are just speculating here, but it feels like the idea that Trump is encouraging Chinese businesses and David Sachs is encouraging Chinese businesses to buy NVIDIA chips means that there's something wrong with NVIDIA chips, or means that they're being used to spy on Chinese entities or to counter China. Whether or not that's the intentionality of the president or David Sachs, I mean, I would personally doubt it. But the idea is that Beijing sees this and knows, in its heart of hearts, that something must be wrong. That's one piece here on geopolitics and AI. The second piece is step back for a second and think about what AI is and where it comes from. It's basically, in the United States, a reflection of the US internet. And the US internet is far from being a perfect reflection of US reality, but it's a lot closer to Chinese reality than China's internet is for Chinese AI. If you want to go deeper, visually, Chinese AI data is far more accurate. There's a much more accurate virtual or sort of digital image reality of China than textual reality because of the heavily censored nature of the Chinese internet and because of the need for Chinese people posting on certain topics to self-censor. And so whenever people talk about advantages of Chinese AI, I also want to bring up the point where I'm skeptical is what is the actual reflection of that on Chinese reality? Because, again, we're getting philosophical here. What's the reflection on our reality? But we do have to understand how much more constrained Chinese training data on text has to be. The other thing is, wherever you are in the world, what was always true in China and what's becoming true in the United States, and this is not a Republican Democrat thing, it's a reflection of our hyper-polarized age, politics dominates. And so Dan brought it up when he was talking about that, the potential for $1 billion company and all of the tax and the reality implications. But we're not in the age where the cream rises to the top, so to speak, and the best engineers go to the best companies. We are in a very heavily political age, and so as you're out there hiring talent or trying to grow your business, understand that unfortunately the nationality of your staff and the nationality of the companies you're doing business with is probably one of, if not the most important factor. And the final thing I'll say, and then turn over to Mary and Dan for other thoughts, is because of the change in the administration, the focus is on U.S. nationalism, but China for decades has been far, far more focused on this issue and is still far, far more focused on this issue. And so the most salient fact of every American company in China is that they're an American company. They would be treated radically differently if they were British or German or Nigerian, because that's the way Beijing operates. And it sees these companies much more so than the Trump administration as political actors and as pawns in this battle. And we just have to be very clear-eyed to that reality.
I have some questions for the two of you. So Isaac, you said that working closely with one side, if you're a company working closely with one side, breeds distrust. But wouldn't you also say it's true that if you're working with both sides, that also breeds distrust? I mean, China does not trust they don't even trust their own companies. So I don't understand what you said there.
So there's no situation where Beijing is going to place a lot of trust in a foreign company, like regardless of how it engages. I think the point is that people's China strategy has long been, I have to work closely with the Communist Party and I have to hew closely to the Communist Party as a way to succeed. And first off, that causes a lot of problems in the United States. Second off, I do think Jack Ma's often mocked advice about this is the best one, which is love the party, don't marry it. And so especially for foreign companies, but Chinese companies have this problem as well. People work too closely with the party or with a certain element of the Communist Party, and that gets them in a lot of trouble because the party constantly consumes its own. And so I think that the best recent example of this is what happened to Bank of China just under a year ago, where the former chairman of Bank of China, Liu Liange, got sentenced to death for corruption. Did he do it? It's unfortunately it's unfortunately irrelevant. Who knows? Maybe not.
But he did it, and 500 other people did it just as badly, but they didn't get charged.
They were safe, and he is now on death row. And so understanding, and Bank of China is functions as a ministry effectively in the Chinese system, and he I think was a vice minister, party ranking. And so you can imagine a major U.S. bank thinking, "Hey, I have this great strategy in China. I have a close relationship with the chairman of Bank of China. I'm really in." But you've got to be very careful with these political wins. And so I think the point isn't that there's a way to operate in China where the Communist Party trusts you. The point is that this is always going to be incredibly fraught. And it's something that you have to navigate on a real-time basis.
Okay. And one quick question for Mary, because of your background in insurance, I have read multiple times people saying AI is the one risk that's uninsurable. And I don't really even know what that means. I don't know if that's true. Is that something people say in insurance? What's that mean?
Dan, I said that Stevens had an insurance brokerage. I have a broker's license, so I can sell you stock, but I can't sell you an insurance policy.
Okay.
I think every aspect of the American economy is figuring out AI, including the insurance industry, including financial services. I mean, look, for instance, at the explosion of AI companies just trying to figure out how to construct better portfolios, right, for your average investor, right? Say, I want to invest like Warren Buffett. I want to track what he does, produce that portfolio for me, and it will. And tell me how to do that and how I should, buy, et cetera, et cetera. So, is AI uninsurable? The insurance industry is amazing. I'm sure that those fantastic actuaries will figure out how to price the risk. Of course, if AI becomes sentient, then we're all doomed and it doesn't matter. But I want to go back just very briefly to what Isaac said, because I think it was incredibly important, profound, which is that anyone who's operating in China in any capacity, as an investor, as a manufacturer, who's simply buying parts to then put together somewhere else, like Mexico or another third country. I think what Isaac said has to be emphasized, that once you operate in China, you are subject to Communist Party jurisdiction. And every company in China is subject to civil military fusion, which means that anything you do, any part of your data, even the people themselves, can be taken, right? So you might be an American company and feel you have a great relationship. As Isaac said, that doesn't matter. Your feelings don't matter. What matters is the environment in which you operate. And we're in a very, very difficult time because we're in a transitional period. And Dan, I think we've talked about this on a prior webinar, but important to reiterate. China considers us an enemy. We do not consider China an enemy officially, right? We use the language competitor, which is unfortunately what the US government under Trump 1, when we were in office, came up with. It's actually incorrect, but it's the language that we use. It means that we view them like France, that they're somehow competing with us economically, militarily, diplomatically. Well, that's not how they see us, but we're not there yet. And so you have a lot of prominent US corporations who have maintained their presence in China, JP Morgan, Tesla, Nike, Thermo Fisher, the pharma companies, you name it. And yet they see the kind of risks that Isaac is counseling his clients on and that you counsel clients on, Dan. And they're saying, what do we do? This is making us very uncomfortable. The 3-year COVID lockdown, we just saw the example of, everybody pulling out of Russia a couple of years ago. What are we supposed to do? How do we navigate this? And, I always say I never tell people what to do because I think every corporate's situation is unique. You could be making T-shirts. That might work for you for another 10 years for all I know. But it certainly, particularly boards, need to start talking about what are the real risks that they're facing there. Is it viable to go somewhere else? Would you ever have accepted concentration of risk in any other country to this extent? And, these special kind of carve-outs for China, this idea that somehow China's special and distinct and unique, and we'll accept conditions there that we would never accept in Germany. I think those days are over. And I think companies are just, trying to figure it out, but they know, right, that this is not the China of, 5, 10, 20 years ago.
It's an excellent point, Mary, and I really want to underscore the need to price risk. It's really a fundamental point, and it's not, hey, investing in China has a risk and there's no risk anywhere else. As anyone who's ever run a business knows, investing in the United States has risk. Cross-border with Canada has risk. It's all about risk, and it's all about taking the appropriate amount of risk. And so, to Mary's point, if you're importing a part of a T-shirt from China and it's 3 times as cheap and twice as dependable, maybe your goods to be seized or your potential to be a pawn in a broader game. And if the margins are tighter or if the company you're working with is less efficient, maybe it won't be. And so what we counsel companies to do, and again, Marion, your point of, companies know their business far better than we do. And for us, it's just explaining, here's the 100 factories you're working with, or here's your partnership selection, and here's the risks with these. And you are more than capable of making very intelligent decisions based on that information.
Well, one more note maybe for Dan, when you talked about, and to Isaac's point of, if you're working in both jurisdictions, you might be mistrusted in both. I mean, that's NVIDIA, right? That's Intel. The semiconductor AI companies
Apple.
are working in both. Apple,
Starbucks.
Starbucks, yeah. I mean, there are a lot of companies that are working in both jurisdictions, and I feel like they're behaving, especially these, mega cap companies, behaving in ways where, they just sort of feel like they can continue on, and that this environment is just going to somehow stabilize. It's a very U.S. focused point of view. The destabilization is not coming from the United States. It's coming from China. China is the source of the destabilization of the relationship. The party is the point. So that's what we try to drive home here is, get out of your strategic narcissism and focus on the environment and the viewpoint of the policymakers where you're doing business.
It's interesting because since probably around 2017, I've been warning our clients about the China risks, and I've basically been ignored for 5, 6, 7 years. But I do think it's changed, and I divide companies up between those who are making money off China, let's say a Starbucks, and companies that are saving money by producing in China. And those companies that are making money off China, I would say close to 100% of them realize that they're playing a game of Ring Around the Rosie, I think it is, where somebody's going to end up with the last chair. And they know that. And so what they're doing is their attitude, which I'm not going to question, is we're going to be there as long as we can make money. And when we can't, we're going to leave. And that's what's happening. But in the meantime, they're lightening their footprint there to reduce their risk overall and to reduce the risk of their people. And companies that are buying from China are doing everything they can to get out. But a lot of times it's very difficult. And what bothers me a little bit is that people have decided they need to get out of China, but they're not being very thoughtful about where they're going. So I was talking with a client yesterday who's moving their production from China to Colombia. And I said, good call. I really like Colombia. It's got a 10% tariff. I think it's important to the U.S. I think it's generally pro-U.S. I know it has a leftist government right now, but I think it's pretty much locked into the U.S. So I don't see, it's not a coincidence that it has a 10% tariff. But I've had companies who have said, yeah, China got really tough, so we moved everything to Cambodia. And my first thought is, I really wish you hadn't done that. I mean, I'll turn it over to Isaac because he's a lot better at explaining this sort of thing than I am. But it's not just China you need to be worried about.
Get that question all the time. People ask about Vietnam, and I'll say Vietnam is also a repressive one-party communist state, which generally mistreats its workers and is a terrible place for dissent. And from a U.S. political risk perspective, is a much safer place to invest than China. And so understanding both the reality of working and operating in China and the perception in the United States is so incredibly important. Something I'll mention a lot, and then we have some questions from the audience, is the difference between Huawei and Norinco. So Norinco is one of China's largest weapons manufacturers. It's heavily involved in the war in Russia, and it gets no attention. It's heavily sanctioned, but it has no brand recognition in the United States, whereas Huawei does. Objectively, Norinco is a much worse company, but people get in public affairs trouble and regulatory risk trouble for working with Huawei, not in the same way that they'd get for working with Norinco, because your average consumer and your average Hill staffer has never heard of Norinco. So also understanding granularly when you're making these decisions, certain partnerships have higher risks because of perceptions of the United States or hyper locally for a factory you're opening outside of Memphis. So a question on what Dan was saying about companies decoupling now. How has this changed? Companies flocked to China for the market share, did joint ventures, had their IP stolen. Is there still this sense that China is this large untapped market? Was the view shifting now? I think Dan answered part of it. I'm sure we all have thoughts. Mary, I'll start with you if you want to answer that one directly.
Yes, I think the view has shifted. It started shifting under the first Trump administration, which kind of changed the focus of the conversation to insisting on fair and reciprocal treatment on trade. But it really, I think, shifted with the 3-year COVID lockdown. Thirdly, it shifted because the bipartisan view of the leadership in Beijing changed in the United States, because I think people woke up. They said, gosh, this nation isn't really, not the nation, I shouldn't say that. The party is different from the Chinese people. We love the Chinese people. But I think in a bipartisan way, policymakers in the United States said they think we're an enemy and we need to behave that way. And they're doing things we don't really like in a lot of arenas, picking fights with their neighbors and hacking our domestic network infrastructure. By the way, that's still going on. That's shocking that nobody talks about that. It's probably, quantum's more important than TikTok. But I do think the view has shifted. And I think, companies aren't getting the kind of clear directionality from the administration. In fact, they're getting confusing messages, because on the one hand, you have portions of the Trump administration that want to shift resources to China, view China as our greatest threat. But on the other hand, you have the Treasury Secretary and the Commerce Secretary wanting to engage. And of course, this call is navigating geopolitical risk in the age of AI innovation. You've got the Commerce Secretary saying everybody should buy NVIDIA chips. We've got to hook them on, American technology. So it's very confusing for companies, but they know that it's not a vast untapped market, as your viewer says. They understand that there is now political risk there that they didn't appreciate. And as Isaac said, I think they're looking for alternatives.
And I can put some numbers on that. They're going to be micro numbers, but I truly believe they're writ large. For probably 15 years, up to around 2017, we were forming 5 to 10 companies in China every year. I don't think we formed a single company in China since 2018. That's a big shift. So they know, people know. I mean, the companies, they're just not going there in that same sort of way.
So when we present our data on top US companies' China exposure, Apple was in the top 10 last year. They're not in the top 10 now. And the question we almost always get is, hey, why is Apple not in the top 10? Why is Microsoft not in the top 10? Microsoft also has very high China exposure. And the point is twofold. One is that companies like Apple have made quiet, meaningful, very surreptitious steps to decouple. The other point is that there are these very large US companies that have been so heavily entangled with the Communist Party for decades, and breaking up is hard to do. And the companies that are at the top of our list are mostly household US names, Coke and Pepsi, Ford and GM, these companies that, to Dan's point, both make a lot of money selling into China and save a lot of money from importing from China into the United States. And it's a very, very meaningful budget item on both sides, even for these massive companies. And so they're working really hard to try to figure out how do they navigate this relationship. Another question. Oh, go ahead, Dad.
Well, here's a question for you, Isaac, and Mary also. Our clients who are in China are, I would say, rightfully terrified to leave China for fear or even to reduce their footprint too obviously. And there are definitely little things that seem to happen. I shouldn't call them little, quote unquote, non-governmental things that seem to happen to companies that try to leave China. All of a sudden, somebody who they settled a $1 million dispute with 3 years earlier comes out of the woodwork, taxes that they thought they were current on, they owe $1 million. But what happens to these companies like Apple? I would have put Apple in the top 3, and you're telling me they're not even in the top 10. That's how quietly they've moved out. What have been the repercussions for these companies that can't hide it? I mean,
very serious. And it's absolutely that. And, it's tough because I'm very for corporate transparency, but certainly the best way for companies to reduce their China exposure is to do so incredibly quietly. And, I'll get questions from journalists all the time where they'll say, hey, I'm doing a story on companies decoupling. Any of your clients want to talk? And I'll say, absolutely not.
Correct. They'll never talk.
Want any credit for that. And I completely understand it, because Beijing has all of this leverage, and Chinese actors that aren't tied to Beijing see this as an opportunity. And so, someone, to your point, who has a dispute with the company can decide to reactivate the dispute because they understand that if the company is leaving, they are more vulnerable. And so the way to do it is, frankly, the way that Apple did it. So, I did an op-ed in Barron's the other day. Apple had this very high-profile joint venture with a company that used to be called Xinjiang Goldwind. They took Xinjiang out of their name, Xinjiang being the region in northwest China, where upwards of 1 million Muslims and others have been put in concentration camps. So Apple got a lot of flack when they did this joint venture about 6-7 years ago. And they shut it down completely quietly in just 2 or 3 years ago. And it just shows up in an obscure Chinese corporate records database. Apple didn't disclose it to the SEC. When you're a company of Apple's size, that joint venture was not material to Apple. And so it's not like they didn't commit an SEC violation by doing so. They just decided they didn't need to disclose it, but it was a meaningful joint venture from a political aspect, and they shut it down quietly. And they're trying to shift their business to ways that they're engaging with China that gets a lot less attention. Patrick McGee's excellent book on Apple in China shows a lot about what the company has done. And over the last year or two, they, like so many other companies, have seen the writing on the wall and are working to find ways to reduce that exposure so that they can better balance the risk. Another question from the audience about what AI can do to social media and the media environment in general. So if we take a step back and look at the sort of AI media risk, is that a threat to world democracies? And then how does that engage with some of the business decisions that companies face?
Way back when I was like a couple jobs ago, when I was at the Journal editorial board, the news side was already using AI to write stories. That was many years ago. So far from being a risk, I think it's going to improve the quality of the prose in many publications, because we'll have smarter writers in the form of AI companions. Obviously the big risk is, verifying that what AI is producing is accurate and attributable to the right people, and is it making up quotes, etc. AI is rapidly transforming and improving, and there will be companies set up to do verification work, right? We have a competitive market, and if there's a market need for that, then we will produce it. On the China side, every effort that the party puts forward is to maintain and expand their control. There's no media in China. There's propaganda, and the party controls every message, not just to the population, but that it pushes out externally. And I really can't stand that term Chinese media. It's not accurate. There is no Chinese media unless it's free people in Orange County, California, or Flushing, Queens, who are Chinese exiles writing about China. That's the only Chinese media that's going on, or Apple Daily in Taiwan, which is, a free place. So there's no real media in China. What there is a vibrant blogosphere and, conversation going on between Chinese people that is carefully monitored and
by AI.
By AI, right. It's frankly very dangerous for Chinese people to have frank conversations online anymore. It just probably can't be done. So it's sad, but at least in the free world, I think AI will be a great boon to the media eventually.
I gave up my WeChat account probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I'm glad I did. We're starting to see something that is, you're talking about propaganda, fake media accounts. We have a lawyer who deals a lot with internet fraud, big cases where people butchering the pig scandals, or not scandals, scams. And so in the last month, 2 small businesses reached out to us, and I wanted to talk to both of them, even though I don't do the internet fraud work, because it was so interesting to me. And one was a law firm, a good-sized immigration law firm in the Midwest, where everybody there speaks Spanish. And they have a very big and successful multimedia presence, and they're being duplicated on Instagram, on YouTube, everywhere. And it's not really harming their business much, but it's starting to impact their reputation, because people, and actually now that I think about it, this happened to us. Somebody called us 3 times asking about his case, and we're all like, we don't represent this person. And it turned out that he had paid a fake law firm $15,000 based on a letter that was purportedly from the FBI, the SEC, and I think the Department of Justice, saying that he needed to hire our law firm to, I mean, I wish those 3 governmental bodies would instruct people that they need to hire us. They needed to hire our law firm to release his funds. So he paid, quote unquote, our law firm $15,000 and was calling to ask why we hadn't done anything. But this other firm, it's just being duplicated, and they're stealing money, and it's going to hurt their reputation when people pay for visa help and get no assistance. So it's, these threats are really out there, and they're only going to get worse, because I can't see how they could get much better.
I think on AI and geopolitical risk, I remember Bill Clinton's comment that trying to control the internet is like trying to nail Jello to the wall, which first was, I think, the conceptual reality of China trying to control the internet, and then an often mocked comment when Beijing did successfully control the internet.
Right.
And I don't think we have a metaphorical framework for AI and social media, and can you control it? Can you not? Is it the solution? Is it the problem? And so I look forward to the world's politicians, saying things that stick in our collective consciousness and then get overtaken by the evolution of AI. We have a few minutes left. I think I'll end with the question, shared a lot of thoughts here. If you're running or operating a business that's navigating geopolitical risks in this age of AI innovation, what's the one thing that you should remember?
I'll let Mary answer that first.
Well, it's a great question. It's a difficult question to answer. So thanks so much, Isaac, for giving that to us. I think that a lot of executives and boards are returning to the basics, where you don't concentrate your supply chain in a single country, and you don't ignore the policy environment, and on the negative side. And the positive side, you embrace innovation, and you experiment with AI. And by the way, there are just oodles of free courses that you can take as executives and directors to help you get started to do that. I just think we lived in this unusual period of time where, after the fall of the Soviet Union, we thought, well, everything's great. The U.S. is won. It's the end of history, and it's a unipolar moment, and we have no enemies and no problems, and we can invest anywhere we want, even in places like communist China, where they say they hate us, but we can kind of ignore that. No problem. They don't have a rule of law. No problem. No property rights. No problem. Well, that era is over. And so back to basics, back to prudent risk taking. And you've just got to go out and find people who understand and can bridge those two worlds, the financial and the legal world, the political and the policy world, people who are standing in between. I mean, this is why the 3 of us talk so often, is because, there aren't that many of us. And I think it's just increasingly important, that you look at all aspects of your risk profile. And so it's a great topic. And, as always, it's just a real pleasure to be with you, gentlemen.
And what I would say is, stay abreast of things. I have a friend who I have said, you're really good at predicting things. And he will say, I don't predict anything. All I do is read what's going on and gather up the data points. And I think that businesses need to do that and not just rely on the experts, because, and both of you have touched on this during this webinar, your business, you know your business better than anybody else. And I remember I was on a panel at Northwestern University, and somebody, this was a long time ago, they said, how do we stay abreast of compliance matters in China? And there were like 5 of us on the panel, and we're all looking at someone else to answer. And I don't remember who answered first, but the answer is there's no really good answer other than you can pay a lawyer or a compliance expert a huge amount of money to do it for you, but nobody's going to know. I mean, they're going to have to figure out your business and then do it. You're the one who's most connected to your business. I'm not saying don't hire experts, but I am saying that you're in the shoe association or the clothing association. So you've got these resources that are relevant to your business. And so, yes, you should read, the what's going on in the world, but it's also your job to stay abreast of what's going on in your industry. And that, you can call it back to basics. I would just say AI it's different than everything else. The internet was different than everything else. It's your job to learn about it and stay abreast, particularly as it relates to you.
Those are excellent points from both of you. I'll end by just saying, and it's in the title about geopolitical risk, understand these risks. Think about them. It's very simple advice, but realize that you have to navigate political risk in the United States and China. And the idea that many in Silicon Valley would like to espouse, that the best product can win or that you can innovate your way out of this. I think people who've lived in San Francisco and dealt with San Francisco politics understand that that's not the case. And so have that be the forefront of your strategy. Thank you all for joining today. It was a great conversation. Appreciate the great questions. Mary and Dan, a real pleasure. And please feel free to stay in touch, folks in the audience, and reach out with any private questions you had. Thank you all for the time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.